Welcome to today's Let Love Begin podcast episode. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Deborah Serani, a distinguished psychologist, professor, and award-winning author who brings over 30 years of expertise in depression, trauma, and peripartum disorders. With her new book, Living with Depression, Dr. Serani continues to inspire and transform lives in the realm of mental health. I really love this episode. Dr. Serani has a ton of super useful techniques and ways to identify what we might be going through. And I'm really excited to bring you this conversation. And here we go.
This is Let Love Begin, a podcast for the recovering brokenhearted, ready to heal and reclaim their enthusiasm. Hey there, it's Tali here. I have a quick favor to ask you. If you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, I'd love your help in sharing it. Is there someone you could share this episode with who might benefit from this conversation? Your support in spreading the word means we can connect with more amazing listeners like you, and it really means a lot to us. Thank you in advance for your help. Every share really makes a difference, and you never know how it might impact someone's life. Okay, back to the episode.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Deborah Serani.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Talia.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to have you. We had a wonderful call. I mentioned this before on the podcast, but before I meet with each guest, we have a little 15-minute chat to get to know each other, and ours was particularly memorable.
It was? Oh, that's nice. That's meaningful.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you. I think we were like, oh my gosh, if we lived closer, we'd totally be friends.
Yes, we would totally be friends.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, thank you for being here today. And today we're going to talk about when does sadness become depression? And before we get into it, I'd like to hear a little bit about you and your story and how you came to be where you are today.
Oh, okay. The short version is that when I was a teenager, I didn't know I was living with a serious depressive disorder. And as I started to descend further into a major depressive episode, I attempted suicide. Luckily, was interrupted, so I couldn't complete it, and got immediate help. The next day, I was sitting in a therapist's office, and I came to learn that what I was sitting with and living with all my life up until that point was a clinical disorder, and I didn't understand it. And as I started to get better and learned about my illness and learned about treatments for it, I decided I wanted to become a therapist, a psychologist, just like the therapist who was working with me. So not only do I treat mood disorders, I still live with one. I have what's called a persistent depressive disorder still to this day. At age 63, I'm living with it very, very long time. But I understand the textures of depression, and I think it kind of gives me a unique perspective when I work with individuals, children or adults, or when I'm teaching, or when I'm doing podcasts, radio shows, to help kind of the general public realize that it's a serious but treatable condition, and that the more you learn about it and you can identify it, the sooner you can get help. So this has been my life's work, and I'm always so happy to be invited, and to know that, I'm meeting with you in Australia is just such a great bucket list, because I've always wanted to visit.
Oh, well, you should definitely come and visit. It's
I have to. It's time is not getting, time is.
I know, and it moves so fast. Just to go back to your story, how old were you when you attempted suicide?
I was 19, but for a very long time, I was just always kind of tired, and people would describe me as sad and shy. And I would always say, gosh, I'm just always so tired. And I remember feeling like that as a young kid. And what ended up happening is that my persistent depressive disorder worsened because it was college time, and triggers can press on us in lots of different ways. And when I went to school, there were no answering machines, let alone cell phones. So when you were out of the house, you couldn't get in touch with anybody. And I felt very splintered and disconnected from my friends. And I really started to deteriorate, not going out, having really bad thoughts. And what happens with the frontal lobe of the brain with depression is your judgment and reasoning become very faulty. And this is why people who are in the grips of a suicidal thought think what they're deciding to do is good. Once recovery happens, I can't believe I ever intended to do any of those things. It's so foreign to me. But that's the slipperiness and corrosiveness of depression. So I was 19 and I had access to lethal weapons. My father had a gun and it was just a little too easy to get to.
Right. Which is a common story in the States, really, isn't it?
Oh God, it is so bad here. Yeah.
I know. It's
I
really,
think there's more guns than people.
yeah, I believe that. Yeah. It's such a foreign concept to us because we had one mass shooting and then they changed the law and you can't get a gun anymore.
Sounds good to me. Sounds like a smart idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had this clinical depression that you didn't know you were diagnosed with. What if someone's may not know, might be in the same position as you, may not know, or may not have a condition like you haven't, and they go through a breakup? What are some key signs that a trigger like a breakup that the sadness may be developing into depression?
That's such a great question. What turns certain behaviors into a clinical concern is time and what we call pervasiveness. Pervasiveness means across the board, how difficult has this trigger impacted your daily life? So for somebody who may have a propensity for sadness or has really been traumatized by a love that's lost or a breakup, the things to look for are any significant quick behavioral changes. Are you sleeping more? Are you sleeping less? Are you eating more? Are you eating less? Are you tearful, crying? There's normal, or I hate that word, expected reactions that should come with something sad, right? The range of human emotions means we should be sad over something as heartbreaking as a love loss. But if it becomes 2 weeks or more, 2 weeks seems to be the criteria for most mood disorders. So if you're struggling with concentration, tearfulness, real fatigue, because breakups particularly cause enormous stress on the heart, physical aches and pains. And if you can't get to work or you can't get to school, or you're foggy and can't make decisions, or things that were easy are now difficult, and it's going on not only at home, not only at work or school, it's happening in the car, it's happening in the supermarket, it's happening in lots of places that essentially this is kind of the shroud of sadness has really kind of weighed itself on you. So that's the time, 2 weeks or more, and across the board. You know, if you're only crying at night before you go to sleep, yes, that's really hard. But if you're functional everywhere else and you can kind of move forward and you're not having any difficulties or bumps in the road, that may not be a clinical concern. But when we start to hear, I'm crying at work, I was in the car, I can't sleep at night, I'm up pacing, it's a month now, what's going on? That's when we start to say, how about we look at this a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, interesting, because I remember going through my hardest breakup and trying to go to work and thinking I'll be all right, I can hold it together, and then just completely falling apart at work and actually like physically not being able to keep it in. And I rang my boss in tears and just was like, I'm really sorry, I thought I could keep it together, but I can't. And she's like, just wrap this up and then go home. Because I was like,
that's so wonderful that your boss was supportive like that.
Well, we were in a setting where I really needed to have it together. And it was like, it was definitely not appropriate for me to fall apart. So you're talking about in that like scenario, for me, I was able to contain it and then fall apart on the phone and then go home. But like you're talking about like falling apart in front of the client and not being able to keep it together at all.
Yes, or even for some people being able to contain it, but knowing that there's an enormous amount of stress and force to hold it together.
Right.
And you get through it. You get through your client meeting or your workshop or your teacher teaching the class, whatever it is. But then there's this, that was so hard. I don't know if I could do it again. And then you do it again. So you're kind of white knuckling it or biting the bullet, but the stress of it is really enormous. And that might be something that a mental health professional can help you with. But again, there's a certain grieving period that's very expected.
It's interesting that it's 2 weeks. I feel like that's not that long.
Well, the behavioral symptoms of depression, when we're looking at symptoms, it's about 2 weeks. But I would say for any significant loss, several months. I would say the trigger of a breakup, divorce, separation, anything where there's a significant loss of a loved one, because a breakup is just as powerful as a death, because it is. In many ways, there's an experience of grief and bereavement. So when we're talking about the actual breakup, yes, many months to recover. But if during those months to recover, you're really experiencing a depression whilst that grieving is going on, it's a good time to get some support. Not that that's a bad thing. It can turn into something what we call prolonged grief disorder. So yes, I'm talking about two different things. Right. I'm talking about the actual symptoms themselves being consistently there for 2 to 3 weeks, but give yourself some time to grieve, because a breakup does require some time. But if you're finding, and here's where it clashes or intersects, if you're finding you're really struggling with your grief and bereavement and you can't get to work, or all the things that we were talking about, there are grief specialists, and very expected that some people will struggle because it's very hard for them, because it's such a loss. And that's why it's so uniquely different for each person.
Yeah, wow. Hearing you speak, I actually never knew there was a thing called prolonged grief. I definitely went through that. And hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, that's definitely what happens to me. Yeah. And I was like in this place where I was like, I really desperately wanted to move on. And I just, I didn't know the tools. And I was like, I just wish someone could give me the answer and I would do it.
Well, I was talking with you when we had our meeting before, that breakups tend to be really minimized in the general public and even in health, in physical and emotional health. But the psychological perspective is this is called an object loss. And it's not just, we weren't meant to be together and that's the way it is. It's something so far more intricately complex that for some people, this loss is like a part of who they are, and what their current life and future life represents is gone. So, even with young children and teenagers, we really need to respect that for some people, a breakup is an enormous loss, and that there's a grieving time needed for it.
Yeah, in our chat, I mentioned a friend of mine who's a very loving friend, but he said to me, you're like still going on about your breakup. And I remember thinking, wow, you just really don't get it. And then he, and then he went through a breakup, and then he started talking to me about his breakup, and he's like, I get it now. And I was like, yeah, it sucks. And then he's like asking me like, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? And I was like, yeah, it was really hard. And I was like, the one piece of advice I can give you is don't take as long as I did. Like if you can avoid it. Like that's why this blog was started, to help me through the grieving process, because it was such a loss. And as you talk about the breakup, I want to go back to actually something we did discuss in our meeting. We were talking about attachment styles, and I grew up very secure. I was a very confident kid. I had an incredible mother who is just a like total rock star, and who I owe, I think, all my security to. And then I was with my partner, and it was a very secure relationship. So I felt very emotionally safe. And it's funny, when I talk to men in particular about being safe, I'm not sure, and I should ask them more in depth, but I think they think I'm talking about physical safety, but I'm talking about emotional safety. And with my most significant relationship, I felt so safe just to be myself. And it was so incredible. I was like, wow, I can really be me. And you're like fully seeing who I am.
Yep.
And that was like such a secure, loving place to be. And it just made everything so heightened. Like life was just this, like all the colors were brighter. Everything was just more vibrant and incredible. And I was just felt like I was in this envelope of love. And so when it ended, it was amazing. So when it ended, it was like totally crashing down. And I was talking to you about how I think I went from secure to insecure. And I'd never experienced that before. And so that, that was around my 30 years old. I was always living in this place, even before I met him, that I was a secure person. And then I was like, holy shit, I'm not a secure person anymore. And it's a really uneasy place to be. It's like trying to run on a waterbed,
Yeah, the trauma, and I use that word a lot, and other people may not, but in my studies and research and training, what you experienced was such a jarring loss that it overwhelms your mind, body, and spirit, and everything that you came to know is not there anymore. It's an annihilation or an obliteration. So here you are, creating a unit with your partner that you'd never had before. You're in a level of authenticity and complete openness that you've never had before. This is a world that you're creating and seeing with him that you've never had before. And it is interesting that men think of, well, I'm big and strong and I can keep my partner safe. But there's that emotional, spiritual safety of just being able to be who you are and feel safe.
That's right.
And authentic. Yep. So now that's gone.
And seen. Yeah.
And seen and cherished and truly seen and still treasured anyway. In spite of, all the good, bad, and indifferent. So it becomes very hard to trust again. That trust was so wonderful to have, but you lost it in such a way. And that's what happens with some breakups, that there's this creation of this really wonderful entity in life, only to discover that it's not attainable anymore. So, it shatters one's sense of self. So it's not unusual to move from secure to insecure. But as I said to you, you're well on your way back to secure, and you can and will attain that again.
Yeah, I definitely feel on my way for sure. It's interesting as well, you talked about trauma, because I agree with that. And what's interesting about our situation was that we didn't break up because of anything bad happening. There was no infidelity. We broke up because I wanted to have kids and he didn't. So it was like just different life paths. Like, it was traumatic because I was like feeling like I was ripped apart from this person who I was supposed to be with. But yet I was like, if I don't do this, and really, as I reflect back on it, I kind of think I actually probably wouldn't have done it, to be honest. I don't think I was strong enough to break up with him. But I think he saw, no, you really want this. So he started withdrawing. He's much stronger than me, in my opinion. And then he was just able to detach. And that was really painful and traumatic for me. I was like, oh my God, But I know he was doing it because he's like, you have to go and live your life. You have to go and do what you want to do.
It was a very loving but difficult thing that he did. But knowing that if you had stayed, it might not have still been this wonderful relationship, and certain things might have seeped in and whatnot. But yes, what a gift, but what a hard gift.
And one of the things he said was, I remember we were having like one of the many chats after we broke up, and I was like crying, and I said, but I love you. And he said, so love me. Oh. And and I was just like,
man.
I know, it really stuck with me. And I was like, I don't need to be with you to love you. I can love you from afar.
Attachment is this an invisible thing. And in the field of psychology, we call it a bond. And it links us so powerfully to another that we have us, the other, and then the relationship. This is why people have broken hearts. There's something called stress cardiomyopathy, where the actual heartache and sadness and physical and emotional separation from their loved one causes the heart to really stress and work hard. And people can die from this broken heart. You can die from it.
Wow.
And so this is a very, very real physical and emotional experience. And people kind of do a hierarchy. Well, if you're married, a long time, that's such a loss. And, well, if you're not married, but you're together, that's still, they kind of typify what's considered or what's appropriate for a heartbreak, for a breakup.
Right.
And I'm always amazed that people have this criteria, because that attachment really is a timeless thing. Of course, if you're with somebody a long time, there's history there. But that powerful bond you create with another who you love is so powerful. And it doesn't have to, it's timeless, actually.
Like you said, there is no one size fits all. But in my case, I would have loved to have really processed it, for about a year and then moved on. And what I didn't realize was, at the time I was doing things to prolong the grief, like drinking or doing things to numb it. And then what I realized is that all it does is it pushes the processing back. That's what it did for me. Since then, I've gone through a breakup, which definitely was nothing. This has been as hard as that breakup. And what was interesting about it was that I deliberately didn't drink. I was like, no drinking. You're going to process this. You're going to chew it up. And I didn't drink for 2 weeks, and I just felt everything, and it was really intense. But I moved through it so much quicker, because I was like, I do not want this man to steal any more of my time. I want to move on. I want to get well and then be get back out there.
And that's what trauma and grief does. It waits. It has to be processed. It has to be metabolized. So it'll wait for you. It will wait while you do all of these distracting things. And very similar to people that I work with, patients that I work with, breakup, divorce, separation, whatever it is, one of the really important parts of structure is no dating, no substance use. Very similar to what you're talking about. You're going to come in here every week, and we're going to talk about how this feels, what this means, want to do with it, all those layered textures. And some people do it. Therapy is a very brave, courageous, not an easy journey sometimes. It's also okay. I would want to make a soft landing for some listeners, that it's also okay if you find yourself drinking or distracting yourself with dating or some substance use. Just see if you can get back to the authentic experience, because it's not always so easy. There are some people who can ride through the storm no problem, and then there are others that are like, I think I need a little rest stop here. Okay.
Yeah. I've had the experience of people I know really avoiding talking about it. What do you think that comes from? What is that?
I'm not ready to talk, or I don't want to go there yet. Very common things I hear, sometimes outside of the office, neighbors, friends. And that experience I meet a little differently than when I'm working from a clinical stance. But that's always a part of maybe a person not ready to be vulnerable in front of you, not ready to feel or think or experience or face whatever those difficult, painful feelings are. Grieving is a very private thing. And if you're lucky to have loved ones that look out for you, friends that check in on you, they want to know you're okay. And they may want to know you're okay by you talking about it. But the converse thing is that you may say, I don't want to open this up in front of you. So the question I always suggest people say is, is it that you just don't want to talk about it right now? Or is that you just don't want to talk about it because it's too difficult? And sometimes that helps a person say, I definitely don't want to talk about it right now because it's difficult. Or I definitely don't want to talk about it right now, but I could catch up with you at a later time and talk about it. But for the most part, we need to be respectful of somebody else's level of pain. And not everybody processes things in that timely way. It really does need to be a unique decision. But if you find somebody constantly shutting you down, I would worry as a friend or a loved one saying, okay, well, if you're not talking to me, or what are you doing with these feelings? How are you dealing with times people may tell you, I got it. I'm journaling, or
right.
I just don't want to think about it. I can't do anything with it right now. Okay. All right. But I'm going to check in again.
Right. Yeah.
May not like it, but I'm going to check in again.
Yeah. I think that's like a very close friend thing to do. Because I've actually, particularly with men, if I've asked questions like that, I've been met with anger before. And I'm like, huh, that's an interesting response. But
Hmm.
like you said, like I don't know your story about your grief. It's like you said, it's very private. So
There are some people who will cry when they tell you, I don't want to talk about it, or they'll feel, threatened. I don't think there's a wrong answer.
right.
But, we certainly, if we see somebody suffering, we as loved ones and clinicians, we want to help them pace that journey, because it does, like I said, grief and trauma, they'll sit on your shoulders for decades. It'll wait, just like a shadow going, okay, I got time.
So you're saying if you don't process that, you'll just keep carrying it with you.
Yes. Well, at least that's the theoretical belief of psychoanalysis, is that our traumas stay with us, whether they're conscious, subconscious, or unconscious. We carry it emotionally and physically. And a lot of trauma specialists will say the body carries the weight of trauma. And, it's nobody wants to talk about these painful things. It's terrible. We don't want to
Yeah.
revisit it. It hurts.
Right.
But what comes from being in the moment with it now, as opposed to when you're going through it,
Mm-hmm.
is a very different conscious traumatic reworking that doesn't happen if you don't visit it. So you get to see it as it's not happening to you, which offers a slightly different perspective, which can validate your experiences or help you see things that you may not have seen, allow certain forgiveness to be there, lots of other things. But that's the power of therapy, is that it helps you rework your narrative from a safer perspective than when you're going through it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you know much about Vipassana, but I did Vipassana years ago. It's like a 10-day meditation sit. And one of the techniques is that the theory of it is, and I hope I'm getting this right, is basically like everything is temporary. Everything is temporary. And what I got from it was like, because you're sitting and like you do this 4 days of training, and then you're supposed to do on the fourth day you do actual Vipassana sit and then on that specific sit you're supposed to not move for a whole hour. So you literally don't move a muscle. And the very first time I did it, I actually sat still the whole time. And what happened is you start getting pain in your body. And then what they recommend is you look at the pain. So you just stare at the pain. And the more you stare at the pain and you're with it, it dissolves and it changes. And it kind of feels
Wow.
like what you're describing here. When you're with the emotion, it's kind of like it dissolves. It's like when you shine the light on it, it comes to light and it just
How
dissolves.
fascinating.
Yeah. And that is funny because that experience for me taught me so much about emotion, and about it was more related to pain, because you're like, it's physically painful sitting there, or like you've got pins and needles in your leg, but you're not moving. And when you get up, it's just absolutely be so incredibly painful. So, and I don't know, it was such a great metaphor for me for those emotions and the experience of the breakup in the last 2 years, where I did sit with it and I didn't drink and I was present, and all the
Wow.
tears would just stream out and you just let them come instead of making yourself wrong for feeling them.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
Right? Because we make ourselves wrong so often, like, oh, you should be okay, you shouldn't be feeling this. It's like,
Right. The
well,
shoulda, woulda, coulda, all that. Hmm.
yeah.
And Talia, it's great when you, as your own person, can move through whatever experiences or books or workshops speak to you, because there isn't one road through this. And I'm a big believer in there's wonderful things out there to help us all along. There's not one right way.
Well, hey there, it's Talia here, and I wanted to take a quick break to let you know that I started this podcast when I went through my most significant breakup. And what really helped me at the time was listening to other people's stories of healing and how they transformed through their breakup. That really helped me understand what I was going through and really gave me hope that I could get there too. Before this podcast, I created an online summit where I interviewed 21 experts talking about different aspects of breakups and how we can let go of our ex and begin to open our hearts again. It's called the Let Love Begin Summit. And if you're interested in watching or listening to the summit, you can go to rebellove.com/summit and use the code podcast for 20% off. It's usually just $21, which is $1 per interview, but you can get it for around 16-ish using the code podcast. I hope you get as much out of it as I got making it. Okay, back to the episode. So on that note, how can friends or family like really best support someone who's going through a breakup related or any kind of grief situation?
Well, of course, try to make sure that you can understand the needs of your loved one. And if they can't convey what their needs are to you, like, I just need some time, I need some space, you can check in on me, but if I'm not so talkative, don't push me to talk. It's really helpful to just listen. I love the word listen because it contains the same letters as the word silent. So when you're sitting with somebody who's in grief over whatever may have happened, just be there for them, listen, and try to understand, not necessarily to help or change, but just so the other person feels heard. Grief makes a lot of people uncomfortable. They want to fix things. And sometimes as the one who's really hurting, all you want is, like you said, to be seen and heard. So that's always the first thing I recommend is that loved ones really take their time to just be there for their loved one or their friend. The second thing is don't put a timer on this. Don't be looking at somebody and saying, you're still grinding on this. This is too long. There's really no speedy way to get through grief. Mm-hmm. But if you're worried, you can say, I'm just so concerned because I see you struggling with this, that, and the other. Is there any way I can help you further or help you find somebody to help you further? It's not to imply that the person can't do it. It's to imply that there's a concern, but again, never in a dismissive kind of way. And the third thing to do is, make sure about your own judgments. I always say, when you judge someone, you're really revealing more about yourself than the other person. So when somebody says, oh, you're better off without him, or it doesn't matter that, she's moved on, just live your life the best it can. Try to avoid those types of statements, because what a grieving person really needs is just a safe place, a neutral place to land. And, those are the three main ways to help somebody is to be there, to listen kindly, and to not be too judgmental about things.
It's really great advice. Very, very great advice. Yes. It's interesting, isn't it? A lot of the times, and I've definitely been guilty of this myself, we make it about ourselves without even realizing.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you can't help it. I always tell people, the one thing, I feel like I'm an Olympic trained listener. And the art of listening is not something that we're taught. And we should be, because people respond to answer their own narrative. Oh, you did that? I went to that place not too long ago. And did you see that? I saw that too.
Right.
But if we listen with the intent to understand another person, those are the friends that I adore being with, because I really do feel heard. And there isn't this competitive conversation, not that there ever is meant to be, but yes, sometimes we can't help but come from this narcissistic bubble of, I want to tell you my story too. But real listening, I didn't make up that phrase. I read it somewhere, that listen has the same letters as the word silent. And I was like, oh, I love this.
What about some resilience? So let's say we're in the journey, like that was just taking forever, and I was pushing it away the first time with the big breakup. Once we heal and we get to a bit of a better place, like where our heads above water at least, how do we build some kind of emotional resilience so that the next time it's not as hard?
Great. You ask great questions. Resilience after trauma inevitably comes when we start to feel safe. Like you said, when you're above water, trauma needs three things. It needs us to feel safe again. It needs us to reconnect again. And it needs us to rebuild again. So in order to get that resiliency, you have to take these slow steps and kind of break it up into these sections. Okay, I want to feel safe again. I want to feel like I can trust again. I want to feel secure again. So I'm going to work on that. Now I'm going to reconnect, and I'm going to reconnect to others, because after grief, we do kind of withdraw, right? So as you come back out, you might be a little more guarded. You might be a little bit more watchful. You might be saying, I don't know if I should invest this much, this quickly. How do I titrate, or how do I portion things out so I can still feel safe and I can still feel trust? And then as you do that and you see that the decisions you're making are good investments, meaning I didn't stay out till 3 a.m. I only went out till 11. And, I don't want to go to the New Year's Eve party. I don't think I'm ready for it, but I'll do a dinner with friends. And you see that those decisions have led to good endings. Like, I feel good, I feel strong. You start to trust yourself again. And then as you start to rebuild, looking for whether it's a new job, a new love, whatever it is, you do that keeping in mind the things that you've learned from your revisiting of the relationship that did not work out. Maybe you'll be a little more selective. Maybe the questions that were difficult for you and your partner to talk about might be something you put on the table sooner. So that part of you doesn't get too attached and then discover that, here I am again, somebody who doesn't want to have children in the circumstance you're in.
Right.
So that builds strength. Resiliency is another word for strength during challenge. So when you have these challenges, and they're little ones and big ones all at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're out and about, you want to date again, you want to try again. You just do it in mindful ways and adjust sooner, trust your instincts. I think that's something everybody would say they've learned from any type of trauma, which is, I kind of needed to maybe do this sooner, or maybe I could have said this differently, or maybe I could have done this differently. Not with blame. It's no blame, but it's about, what can I learn from what I went through so I don't allow myself to be in that difficult challenge again. So much like people say you can't build resiliency, I don't believe that. I think that there are some people who are very, very resilient just by nature. Mm-hmm. But many of us can learn how to move through adversity and find this kind of new strength, new insight, and maybe take something from that black cloud and find that silver lining that, okay, I can say that I have a greater trust in myself. I have a more guarded sense in myself, and maybe that's okay. Mm-hmm. But, when we look over our shoulder, it's important to just remember that what we did back then with our loved ones or in these relationships, you were always trying to make it work. And like you said earlier, sometimes things can't work for these very basic reasons, and not to accept it as if, oh, well, it didn't work out, but to accept it for, wow, there was something really very meaningful I had with this man, in spite of the fact that it didn't work out. And I can now revisit that and maybe not feel the despair as badly, but miss him in a different way.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting when you were just talking then, what came to mind, a friend of mine's a professional soccer player, and he was telling me about when players get injured, because they get really badly injured, they have to do some training so that they still play as hard when they go out, because obviously their body's going to remember, right? And their body is going to be like, well, I don't want to do that thing because I'm going to get injured again. right? It was such a,
Yeah.
like, it
Yeah.
was just flashing in my mind. And he's like, yeah,
Yeah.
the club invests in them getting psychological training so that they go as hard and they play as hard next time.
I think they call that inoculation, like behavioral inoculation. You
Right.
inoculate yourself to go out there, and you're not going to be any part of that injury before.
Yeah. And that's what was flashing in my mind when you were talking about this kind of, it's like, yeah, it really hurt, but you can train yourself to go back out there. And, you read all these memes on Instagram and it's stuff. And it's like, someone wrote something along the lines of, the bravest thing you can do is like love really hard after you've been hurt again, after you
Mm,
love again really hard, as hard as you did before, after you've been hurt. And all these little, really brave things that you do, like breaking up with someone you really love, that
mm,
that we don't give credit to. Like, that's
yeah.
a really brave thing to do, is to break up with someone that you really love, but you know that they're not good for
Oh
you,
gosh,
and letting
yeah.
them go and live their life and you go and
Oh
live.
my gosh, yes. And I have a question for you.
Mm.
Knowing all that you know and all that you've been through,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've been asked this. If you could go back, would you do it again?
Um,
It's such a, ridiculous question on one hand.
yeah, I would. I would actually. No, well, I guess if in the question, would I know what I know now? Would I be able to take that with me, knowing what I know now?
Sure. Let's say yes.
Then I probably would. You see, the interesting part is, because the thing is, he didn't want what I want, and I love him enough to be like, you go and get what you want. Then I want you to have, like, I
Oh,
love you
that's
enough that
beautiful.
I want you to live your life. Like, I want you to. It's not always about me. And the thing is, it would turn toxic. Like, that's gonna be.
Sure.
It's not
Yeah.
gonna work out, because you made it really clear. And it's interesting. What I loved about the scenario was that he definitely thought about it. He's like, I did think about it and I thought about what my life would look like. And he's like, I'd just be doing it for you. And it's not enough reason to do it,
Mm,
you know? And I
very
was like,
open.
yeah, that's true. And it was interesting after it happened, actually, a lot of people were like, oh, well, he doesn't love you enough. Or if he loved you enough, he'd do this. And I was like, I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. That's something we say to make ourselves feel better.
Correct. I agree with you. I mean, this isn't a car.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
This isn't a
And
piece of jewelry. This
yeah, and
isn't,
he's allowed
a
to have
trip.
his own choice, right? It sucks that it doesn't align with mine, but like, it's his life too. Like, you know what I mean? So, and do you really, my mum's, I mean, again, she's incredible. So, and she says things like, do you really want to have a baby with someone who doesn't want to have a baby with you? And I was like, no, I don't. And she says things like, why would you want to be with someone who doesn't like you? When you're in a relationship and people are chasing, it's like, you don't like me. Okay, cool. Next.
Right, right,
Yeah. Like, why do we want to hang around with people that are not interested in us? And, what's the payoff?
right, right. What's the cost?
Oh, Deborah, this has been really amazing. I have
Well,
really loved
Talia, it's
chatting to
been
you.
such a privilege really to meet you and talk with you and cover this subject. And I really thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's been amazing. Do you have any kind of last departing words or guidance or resources you can recommend for people seeking professional help or therapy during their breakup journey?
I would say, as a parting message, that no matter how dark and hard anything is in your life, that with any sprinkling thread of hope, you can heal. And I would want everyone to feel that if they can't find that within themselves, to definitely see if you can go to a loved one, because there's so much after the darkness. And I talk about that from my own perspective, from a depressive perspective, from a breakup, trauma, grief. That hope is an incredible thing. And if you can't find it because you're so overwhelmed or heartbroken, somebody is there to offer that to you until you're ready to run with it. There's always hope and there's always healing.
Thank you so much. You're a legend. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
You can come to my website, and from there you can link to any of my other things. And the website is drdeborahserani.com. You can visit, you can send me an email, you can do whatever you like to do. That'll be the satellite portal to send you into the universe of Dr. Deborah Serani, which is very small. It's a very small, tiny little orbiting planet somewhere in the Milky Way. But thank you. Thank you again.
Oh, Dr. Deborah, you are an amazing guest. And thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Anytime you can invite me back.
I would like that. Let's do that.
Okay. It's a date. It's a date. Thanks again.
This podcast is a Rebel Love production. To find the links mentioned in this episode, go to rebellove.com/let love begin.
Love it.
Love it. Love it.